My name is Clint Calvert, and I'm talking about Harrison assessments and their application to clinical pastoral education. I will be looking at the room and talking to the room, and I'll be sharing my screen just here in a minute so you can follow along with our PowerPoint presentation. All right. I think I've got everybody here. So my name's Clint Calvert, and a lot of my decision-making looks just like this picture. A few years ago, I was given an opportunity to lead an organization in an interim situation. And in that situation, I had very close friends of mine say to me, hey, this is way more complicated than you realize. Hey, you won't make a big difference here in just a few months. And so they said lots and lots of things to me. And I said what most Texans say when someone tells them what they can't do, and that is, hold my beer. Okay. And I went right off the cliff. Okay. And so I want you to think about that story just for a minute, because I'm going to come right back to it in just a minute and tell you a little bit of how the Harrison assessment helped me understand this. Now, I don't know about you, but perhaps you've had all of these done to you too, right? I live in a world of assessment. I've been assessed. I've had Myers-Briggs. I like it. I've had Giants, which is a little different. I've had Strength Finders, which is one of my favorite. And, this just to let you in on me a little bit about command. I could never be a police officer because my command is so high, I would arrest everybody all the time. I mean, you just can't do that. And one of my little pet peeves is people who drive over yellow lines in parking lots. For whatever reason, that's something that just drives me nuts. And my boss says he doesn't understand, why do you insist on that rule when there's almost no other rules in life that you really hold on to but that? But I can't explain it. But Strength Finder says that woo saves my command. So it's had some influence. DISC, I've had the DISC, and it says that I'm a D. And you know what we say about DISC, that there are no bad personality types, right? But then then the D is the bad one, right? And we say that they're not, but then we always say ugly things about people that have the D. Well, I have the D, and I've had all of these. I've had all of these different experiences. But what changed my life was the Harrison assessment, because the Harrison assessment explained how I make my bad decisions. And I'll walk you through the assessment. And you can see how we got to that conclusion. But basically, the Harrison assessment said in so many words, Clint, you tend to take risks without looking at the pitfalls. And you tend to make up your mind without listening to other people. And you put those two things together and you've got a recipe for disaster. And so when the Harrison assessment explained my behavior to me, something happened with it that changed me. Because what happened to all those other assessments I had, Strength Finders, Myers-Briggs, DISC, they all end up on the shelf. And I might briefly talk about them on occasion. But the Harrison became something I came back to over and over again because it explained my own behavior. And I began to see how it could also help me in working with people in coaching relationships and in clinical pastoral education. So there are a couple of handouts that we have. We've got one that's Ron, could you run one of those back to Greg, one of each? There's a sort of a technical paper that's on explaining about 75% of what I'm saying today. And the other thing is a handout from Harrison, which gives you some of these actual reports that you can look at. Now, if you're joining us by Zoom and you want to have these materials, just send an email to clint@influentialcommunications.org. And I'll give you that email again at the end of the meeting, but clint@influentialcommunications.org, and I'll make sure you get a copy of everything you'd like, a copy of this PowerPoint as well as these two papers. Now, let me tell you about Harrison assessments. It's a predictive analytic. It's used by people all over the world in human resource departments when they're hiring a person, when they're trying to figure out how to retain a person, how to develop them. So it's purely a psychological based human resource tool, but it has such broad applicability that I found it something I could really use with CPE. So there are two theories that underlie the Harrison. The first one is this. It's called enjoyment performance theory. And enjoyment performance works like this. You do something, you're good at it, people say you're good at it, and you want to do it all the time. And so you get attracted to stuff that you're good at and people say you're good at. Well, there's things you don't do as well, and people say you don't do them well. And so you start avoiding those things. So what Harrison is measuring when you sit down and you take a 25-minute questionnaire where you put things in order, 8 different items in order, when it comes back with the data, Harrison's able to tell you, here's certain things you're real attracted to, and here's certain things you tend to avoid. And so those measurements are what are assembled to produce the reports that are there. So that's the first theory. The second theory is paradox theory. Now, I just saw this movie and I thought it'd be a great thing to tell you about the movie Twisters, because Twisters kind of pictures a lot of paradox theory. So if you haven't seen this movie, go out and check it out. It's PG-13, so you can give your Pastor Clint recommendation for this. But what's really fun about this movie is there are 2 protagonists. So there's a male protagonist, and his character's name is Tyler Riggs, and he's a tornado wrangler. And so he's from Arkansas, and he goes chasing tornadoes. And here's what he does. He drives into the middle of the tornado with his truck, and he puts augers down, and he just wrangles that tornado. He goes after it. He's very direct. And it's fun to watch kind of that masculine approach to let's wrangle the tornado. Then the other character in the movie is an equal protagonist, is Kate Carter. And Kate is a woman who is a tornado tamer. And she takes a more strategic approach, a more intuitive approach. And so she wants to tame tornadoes by releasing some material into the tornado that will cause it to flush out and cause it to stop building up. And what's fun about the movie is who's right? Well, they're both right. And I hate to be a spoiler, but if you watch the movie, what ends up happening, these 2 people end up working together. And so she needs his more direct approach, and he needs her more thoughtful approach. And so really that's what the paradox theory is all about. So let me kind of walk you through that. So what do we mean by paradoxical traits? So what we mean by this is a paradoxical trait are 2 things that seem contradictory, but are in fact both true. So if I were to say to you, less is more, and on the face of that, you'd say, well, that does not make any sense because those 2 words don't go together. But you know what I mean by that, right? Less is more. The paradox is true. So what Dan Harrison posits is you don't have a genuine strength unless you have a strength in balance. And here's what we mean by that. So if I were to say, hey, are you frank as a communicator? Are you to the point? And you say, yeah, I'm to the point. I don't beat around the bush. I get right on message. I'm very efficient with my communication. And I would say, well, that's wonderful. That's a strength. But what Dan Harrison would say is that you need to be both frank and diplomatic. So we know that the best communicators get to the point, they're efficient in their communication, but they're also kind and tactful and choose their words carefully. So if we could put those 2 ideas together, we have a really strong communicator. In fact, sometimes if somebody prefers one thing over the other, they're actually derailed as a communicator. So let's say if somebody really, really prefers frank and they have little tolerance for diplomacy, they're going to come across like a high D on the DISC scale. They're going to get right to the point, but they're not always going to be careful with the words that they choose. So that's a paradoxical trait. And also what's included with this is something called the flip behavior. So if you prefer one trait over another trait, and I'm going to show you lots of examples, so you'll get to see this, that what happens is when you prefer this trait over the other, if you're under enough stress, your behavior will change and the behavior will get a hold of you. And then all of a sudden you will become the opposite trait and it'll be completely out of your hands. And you've all had that. I've had it happen to me where I acted out of character and people said, I went home, I couldn't sleep that night. That really bothered me that I was maybe harsh with a colleague, and I come back and I apologize and, hey, I'm sorry, I was really out of line. And they go, yeah, we don't know what happened to you. They'll say, you flipped out, right? And that's exactly what we're talking about here is a flip behavior. So let's take a look at some of this. So here's a couple of traits. Oh, I don't want to do that. Bear with me. I just want to move that. Okay. All right. Certain versus open reflective. Okay, so we have to be careful in the Harrison world because every word in this assessment has a meaning specific to Harrison. So we can't look at a word and just assume we know what it means because all the questions that people take in the questionnaire relate back to these legends. So the word certain in our world, Harrison world, means I own my own opinion. I'm confident in my own opinion. Okay. And open reflective means I'm interested in the opinions of others. Okay, so this person is balanced and they're equally interested in the opinions of others and they're equally sure of their own opinion. Now, I'm going to get just a little bit ahead of myself right now, just so you can see, but can you see how chaplains need to be interested in the opinions of others? And so I look when I do this with people to see, are they interested in other people's opinions? If I get a paradox report back and it shows me that they're very high in certainty, meaning that they trust their own opinion, but they're very low in their preference for open reflective, then I know they're not as interested in the opinion of others. And I might have a situation on my hands because I might be dealing with someone entering chaplain education who needs to work on that trait, because I don't know how you can be a chaplain if you're not interested in what other people say. So that's a balanced one. Now here's an unbalanced one, and this also shows up in CPE. And warmth empathy is the desire to use your feelings, to have good relationships, to make good connections. And we want that in chaplains too. We really want them to care and make connections. That's highly valued in our clergy and people who serve people in spiritual care. And in this case, this person, their warmth and empathy is 9.9. It's off the charts. It's very extreme that they do that. But look at their preference for enforcing. It's very low. And enforcing is the tendency to hold people accountable, to make people keep the rules. It's my yellow lines in the parking lot, okay? And you can guess where my enforcing is. It's not, this is not me. It's a picture of somebody else. But you can see, because this person has such a high preference for empathy and a low preference for enforcing, is that almost all of their behavior and tendencies is permissive. Well, jumping ahead just a little bit for us for CPE, can you see what a problem this would be for a student to look like this and be in group supervision? See, they're not going to hold their peers accountable. They expect me as a supervisor to hold them accountable because that's my role as a supervisor. But you all have had the same experience I have, that sometimes the most effective help I've gotten in group supervision has been from a peer. And when my peer calls me into account, my peer says, hey, did you phone this in? Did you use AI? I mean, whatever they want to ask you, then it really weighs a lot more on me than even what the supervisor says, because I don't want to disappoint my peers. Now, you see the big flip behavior, the big hurricane up here? If I get a person like this under enough stress, a warm, empathetic, sweet, connecting person under enough stress, and they have such a low preference for enforcing, their flip behavior is going to be harsh. Now they've had it. They've done all they can do to be nice to you, to give you all the chances you can have. And it's, to me, I just see a mother at bedtime here. I put the kid in bed at a certain time. They were supposed to go to bed at 8:30. And now here it is, it's 10:30. And somehow this kid has managed not to go to bed. And somewhere Mary Poppins' mother disappears. And we get a new kind of mom, a British nanny mom, who's, hey, now you've got to definitely get in bed. So those are just some examples of how those paradoxes show up. Yes.
On that previous chart, they're targeting and or trying to achieve.
Yes. So for all of these, the bottom line would be, we would hope they would be in balance, that they would be in balance. Okay. Now, this is kind of, I gave you kind of one that's in color, and this one in color is a little bit misleading, but they give you all these colors, and their ideal would be this green over here, if you could get over there. But I almost never use that with my students. I usually use ones that don't involve these colors, because I don't need to get that granular. I just need them to see that picture and go, oh, I need to step up in my enforcing of these rules with other people. All right, so let's just kind of walk through some. Now, these are very important to CPE, and I will talk to you about how they are. So this one is self-actualization, and it measures self-acceptance versus self-improvement. So if I'm getting a student in CPE, I want them to be high in self-improvement, because this is the degree to which they want to get better, and I want to see that. But I also want them to be good at self-acceptance. And you might see the little H in the bottom corner. Well, I actually devised a job success formula for the ideal CPE student. And so this is something I consider very important to that they not only want to get better, but they're able to accept themselves, like themselves, and be okay with who they are. This is not the way I show up, and I'll just tell you how it is for me. I'd love to achieve things and have accomplishments, but I'm only happy for about 5 minutes because then I got to go on and do the next thing. And when Mark Twain saying I could live for a month on a compliment, I've never lived a month on a compliment. I could live for maybe 30 minutes, but it's always what's next. And guys, that's a terrible way to live. I'll just tell you, I wish I could celebrate more. But you know, that we're not doing therapy for me. I'm just telling you how it is. But I see my students sometimes show up a lot with low self-acceptance. And a lot of ministers don't like who they are. They don't accept themselves. And that's a problem in CPE. And so we want to kind of help address that. But that kind of shows you that this person actually is in pretty good balance. And they have mostly healthy self-esteem. All right, let's look at another one. Now, I've already shown you this one, the coaching mindset, but you can see what a problem this would be in group supervision. But I also think pastors specifically lose people in their congregations because almost everywhere I go, we want to be in challenging environments where people ask us to do stuff that help us grow. And sometimes we lose people from our sphere of influence because we did not challenge them. And I know as a supervisor, my students will look me in the eye and say, tell me how to get better. And if I don't have a degree of enforcing that I can say, here's how you can get better, here's the standards, here are the objectives, here are the rules, then this is one that's really important to me too. All right, this one's called sustained results. And I want students who are self-motivated. This means they're willing to work, they're willing to put in work to get stuff done. But stress management is also very important. This is self-care. And you see this a lot with chaplains and ministers too, is that they do the work. And it's not a question of the work being done. I don't know if you can see this well, but up there that where it says stressed achievement versus poised achievement at the top, see they're getting the work done, but they're taking a lot of stress on themselves. And so all that would change if they got better with their self-care, their productivity would stay the same, but they would pay less of a price for it. Okay. And so that's how it begins to develop. Now, we've already talked about this one, certain versus open reflective. And this is where a person is balanced in this case, but we want them to both be sure of their own opinion and open to the opinions of others. Now, here's another one I really like called instinctive logic. And this one, you can see it has an L in my little formula here on the corner, but it's still important. And some people choose to decide with their mind, with facts, with data. And some people tend to use their hunches, trust their gut, trust their stomach, whatever you want to call it. And there's no right or wrong. I want you to make sure you hear me on this. When I debrief these, I'm just a tour guide. I am not a judge. There's technically no bad information here. Okay. It's just your preference over mine. In fact, here's what I got to tell people because I'm so sarcastic. If you hear sarcasm in my voice, it's simply because I have my own preferences. It doesn't mean your preference is bad or wrong, or it's just different than mine. So if you hear me sort of acting as though one preference is better than another, I'm failing as a debriefer because these are supposed to be no judgment involved. But you can see here, this person is balanced in both analytical and intuitive. They can use both. But I can tell you from all the students that I've assessed over the years, this isn't always the case. And it does make a difference because I don't know what you call it, but you've got to have some element of mysticism, some element of suggestibility beyond the data, because we're in spiritual care, for crying out loud. So you've got to have a little bit of a bit of that. Now you might be saying, well, what in the world does this have to do with CPE? Because it's a predictive analytic. And I went through and looked at what were the CPEI learning objectives, and I looked at the interdevelopmental model for supervisors, and I'm trying to correlate, why does this matter? Okay. So I've already talked to you about insightful curiosity. It's the idea of, you've got openness to new ideas, new opinions, and certainty in your own. And so look what you do in CPE. You explore one's theological heritage and the impact it has on one's ministry. So you've got to know what you believe. In fact, that's shocking to me that you can go through seminary and come out of seminary and still not know what you believe because you haven't had time to work it out, right? But you can in CPE. And I think it's a shame to just lead people constantly to always hear from other people, but never help them stake out what their beliefs are. So you're trying to get those things into balance. And then the IDM model, the supervisor reflects appropriately on their theology and they identify a personal metaphor or model of pastoral care. So if you were to do this work, you might choose different paradoxes. You might choose different objectives. You might even choose different places from the model. But this was the best that I could do as I looked at it to try to correlate these ideas. And I think I'm generally in the right ballpark. Self-actualization, this is accepting yourself and improving yourself. And so what are we trying to do in CPE? We're trying to develop self-awareness, how your beliefs, attitudes, strengths, limitations, values, assumptions affect your ministry. And then the IDM says that the supervisee is aware of those things. So these are how these correlate for me, is if I can get the work in the paradox that applies in the objective and it applies in the model. Let's do a few more. Respectful candor. I'm able to be straightforward in my communication and diplomatic. And so we want people to develop their personal and pastoral authority. And I don't know how you express that without being able to say it, right? I'm here. This is my role. Here's what I'm here to do. And yes, I can be diplomatic about it, but sometimes I have to advocate for a patient. So I'm going to have to maybe say to somebody that, you're trampling on my patient's rights or the patient's rights at this point. So you're going to, at some point, have to be frank and diplomatic. And then the supervisee is able to establish a meaningful pastoral bond, knowing when it's appropriate to confront, that's frank, support, and or seek clarification. So to me, there's a correlation between these. All right, equity mindset. This is another one of my favorite paradoxes. This is helpfulness versus assertiveness. So helpfulness, everybody wants that helpful person. They're willing to meet your needs, to do whatever it takes to help other people. But they don't put their own needs forward all the time. And that's what assertiveness is. We're trying to get balance because I want you to put your own oxygen mask on first before you help somebody else. And it's shocking to me how many, and I've done hundreds of these, especially with Christian believers or whatever, that they're way out of prefer helpful, and they almost never prefer to meet their own needs or put forth their own needs. So what are we talking about? The same objective as before. And the same awareness here for the IDM is they're aware of how to use their self in pastoral care situations. Let's just do a couple more. Sure. Okay.
We're doctors that and he worked primarily up in the ICU. And of course there would be those times when discontinuation of life support. He was great. And he could explain that with the healing, this patient was not going to get off of me. This is no way to die. Very good. And every so often we'd have one person or maybe a couple people in the family, and people would say, but we believe in God. But we believe in God, but we're waiting for our miracle. And God was saying, a man of faith, pretty fun. And he said, oh, you're so young. He would look at him and say, you've already decided on putting him on the bed. The miracle is a one. We are so beyond. So he could be very caring, but he definitely so good. It wasn't ambiguous on the situation his family was in.
So Kay's telling us a story for those on Zoom. I'm just relaying that to them. That's okay. It's all good. It's okay about a doctor's ability to bring frank medical information along with caring at the same time, even at the end of life. And that's exactly what we're talking about with this, is being able to measure that ability and then to see where it needs to be strengthened, especially because imagine if that doctor is completely frank. He would say all the things about the miracles, we're beyond the miracles without any of the tact. And that leaves a bad experience for people. Well, people ask me, if you show me a paradox report and I have a strong preference for one thing and not the other, and I want to change, how do I change? And what I tell people, and this is the metaphor I use all the time, First of all, you don't have to do anything. You can look at this data and you can say, okay, so what? But I say, let's say you have 100 coins and you have 2 buckets. And the buckets are bucket 1, I'm going to change myself. Bucket 2, I'm going to get people to help me. And you can put 100 coins in the first bucket. You can put 100 coins in the second bucket. You can split those coins however you want to. I know me and my tendencies, and I just had to go to people around me and say, listen, the Harrison assessment shows that I tend to take risk and I do not look at potential problems. Also, I tend to pretend to listen to people when I've already made up my mind what I'm going to do. So I need your help. If you catch me doing those things, please say something to me. Now, let me promise you, I will be mad. Okay, I will be mad. But I'm tired of making these bad decisions like that, going off the cliff all the time. And if you can keep me from going off the cliff, and I'll go so far as to even say, I met a man I call the anti-Clint. And the anti-Clint has all of my traits reversed. So where I'm super high in risking, he's super high in analyzing pitfalls. And he drives me absolutely up the wall. But that guy has saved me thousands and thousands of dollars over the years, because risking is about business and financial decisions. And so I go to the anti-Clint. Now I help him because he hardly ever does anything because he's so careful and sees all the problems. So we're kind of a blessing to each other. But if you were to say, well, Clint, I want to put 100 of my coins in the fix myself bucket or help myself bucket, then we have homework in the Harrison called development by trait. Now, this is something you can use with your students. So let's say a student's taking the paradox report and they come to you and they say, for a learning goal, well, I want to work on my self-acceptance, or I want to work on my frankness, or I want to work on my open reflective, or whatever. This has specific homework that they will hate. And it's on purpose because it's against their preference. And so, like for me to give me development by trait homework on it, analyzes pitfalls, Clint, list out 5 things that could potentially go wrong in this plan of action. Well, I don't want to do that, but I need that, because if I do that, that will help me strengthen that preference a little bit. So this, to me, this is why you can use it in CPE, because you can get specific targeted homework for students related to their paradoxes. Okay. Now, I'm only kind of getting started now. You might say, well, good grief, Clint, but just bear with me because this is a part of my DNA. This is part of what I use all the time. And if you understand that paradox report, you can understand how to work with it in group supervision. So imagine if you'd have everybody in this room were to take it, the Harrison assessment, and I did your individual paradox reports, I could actually put together a report of the people in this room. It caps out at 25 people. Okay, that's how many you can do. But you're in a group of 9 in group supervision. So we did one of these groups this summer, and I want to show you what it looks like for that group and how the supervisor used it. So when we do the team debriefing, everybody's had their debriefing personally with me. And I always ask them, do you want to keep your data private, or do you want to associate your name with the data? And I always honor that. So if one person in the group says, I really don't want to share it, it's fine. We can still use it, but it's a lot more fun if everybody will say, sure, you can put my name with the data so we can kind of see what people look like. So let's look at one of these group team paradox reports. So this is the group composite of a group of from this past summer from a CPE group. This is live data. You don't have their names, okay? But it shows kind of how they're clustered. Can you see how all of them over here prefer the open reflective? Okay, so that's what we want in chaplains. But they're also, they don't have a certainty about their own opinion. So they don't know for sure what they believe. And so with that, we want to work on strengthening their takeaways. So what we're trying to do with the group is to say, okay, we've had a great discussion here. What's the conclusion? What's our takeaway? And they're not going to want to do it because they want to keep the conversation going. But the need for them to have balance requires this little stretch where you're getting them to talk about their conclusions. Here's another one. Look how helpful they are. They're wonderfully helpful, but they don't put their own needs out there. And so by doing that, they need to articulate what are their needs. So I tell the supervisor, ask the group, what do you need? And they're not going to be forthcoming because they don't prefer to do that. I work with church committees all the time, and I love doing this with committees. You'll meet once a month with a different church, and the first night I'll always say, hey, I made a promise to somebody that I love that will be done at 8:30 tonight. Nobody ever says a word about it. We just go on with it. No problem. Next meeting, a month later, I say it again. People are starting to get curious. Who is it that Clint loves that he made this promise to? And maybe by the third meeting, that's right. You got exactly where I'm going. And then I have to spill the beans. It's me. And they're like, well, wow. I said, well, have you ever been at a church meeting where anything good ever happened past 8:30? I haven't. And I love myself too much to be here past 8:30. But watch what I do. By saying that, if I start gathering up my papers at 8:25, nobody's going to get nervous or anxious because I already told them we're going to be done at 8:30. Okay. But that skill in just asserting my need is something a lot of people lack. And helpful Christian ministers, helpful chaplains will stay way longer than they should have, way longer than they need to, because they just need to work on this. They're, putting their own need out there. All right, here. Oh yeah. Yeah, there you go. I'm going to steal that from you. Yes, ma'am. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I'm sure you do. And I'll do my best to help you. All right. So this is a group. They tend to be more diplomatic than they are frank. And so we need to give these people more time to communicate. Look, if you can't be honest and frank in a CPE group supervision, where are you ever going to get to do that? It's confidential, right? So if we can't help bump up your frankness and your honesty to the group, and that, then we're really going to fail there. Okay. So we're trying to, for the most part, doing pretty well, but we want to still help them improve. All right, here's some more about them. I told you earlier about how group team paradox, they expect the supervisor to hold the rules, but they need the peers to do it. And so you can show the group how they can be helpful. And so you're saying to them, I need those of you that prefer warmth and empathy so much to maybe consider being a little bit more enforcing, to encourage people to keep the rules, because you'll have influence on the other students. All right, here's one. This group was great in this area. And so I just told them to keep being awesome. Okay. But authoritative versus collaborative means collaborative is I get everybody else's decision, input on a decision. And authoritative is I'm comfortable with making a decision if I have to. So this is if I were to say to all of y'all, where do you want to go eat? And you all told me kind of, half of you want to go Mexican place or whatever, I would still be able to make the call, but I'm comfortable in knowing that I drew everybody else in. Now, this does come up in some group work. Sometimes supervisors give students a choice of assignments or a choice of what to do, but they're pretty well balanced. So it's not something we really need to tackle. All right. Analytical versus intuitive. We talked about it. This group prefers, as you can see as a group, analytical. And we want to develop their intuition as a group. So we would say to them, hey, what's your feeling here? What's your hunch here? And they're not going to be comfortable with that because most of them have said that they think with their brains, with facts, and this gives them a chance to express that. All right, let's see. Now I'm showing off a little bit here. And the next slide is actually, you can read the next slide. You can't read this one. But this is a map that I made for my supervisor that I was working with based on their Harrison assessments. I wrote this out and sent it to him and said, do not use this every week and every time. But based on his students' Harrison assessments, these are some things he can say to them and use in group supervision. So this is what it looks like where it can be read. Now, all these names have been changed to protect the innocent, okay? But what we can look at Adele, we can look at her column. She prefers to be helpful more than assertive. She prefers to be intuitive more than analytical. She prefers to be diplomatic more than frank. And she prefers to be reflective more than open or more than certain. And so if you want to make Adele shine and you want to ask her a question that she can do well because of her paradox preferences, you would ask her, how does this feel? And she will knock that question out of the park because look at her preference for intuition, right? So she can actually model good intuitive thinking or good intuitive sensing for the group. Now, if you want to stretch her, that's what the deltas are. You would say, Adele, please speak more directly. So you're drawing her out because she prefers to be diplomatic. She does not prefer to be frank. So I can stretch Adele a little bit. Now, please hear me. Obviously, this could be overused. I know we do not want to be manipulative. I'm not looking here to be predictable, but this is something he needs to know as a supervisor, or she would need to know, whoever's supervising, to have as a little map to know where to work with in group supervision. And I've kind of written that out for each person. But imagine if you had this data just on a card or something that they couldn't see, just to refresh you, just to help you think about it. And on my little written card, I have his preferences that are here to help remind him what he prefers. But the two things he needs to ask this group every time they meet, one way or another, because of the way the group shows up, what are our takeaways and conclusions? Okay. Because this group, these were all 100 students. They were all seminary students. They were all typically were younger, and they were very interested in lots of things, but they really didn't assert what they knew. They really didn't put their certainty out there. And then the other thing about the group was they were way off the chart helpful, but they weren't assertive. And so he needed to know more about what they needed. And for me, this is just very, very powerful. All right, let's look at something else you might find interesting. I give this to my students when they start 100 and when they finish 400. And here was a student we gave it to just kind of see what happened over the course. Now, I'm not smart enough. I need some of you PhDs to help me with the difference between causation and correlation, right? And I'm not going to try to make any kind of big case here, but I am going to say, this is what this person assessed at when they started. This is what they assessed at when they finished. Look at the self-acceptance, the third one down. When this person assessed at the beginning of their CPE experience, they were 5.2. When they assessed at the end, they were 8.6. 3.5 points change in their self-acceptance. Now, that's an interesting thing to observe, okay? And you kind of look through there, slightly higher certainty, notably higher self-acceptance, slightly lower self-improvement, slightly lower frank. But to me, it's just interesting to see snapshots of people before and after. And I know, like, if you're in a grant, like let's say we're trying to score a grant for CPEI, this might provide the kind of objective data that we would need to show the differences that programs are making. You can see that he's more analytical. He's notably higher intuitive. He's got less self-motivation. He's got slightly better self-care. And so to me, it's just fascinating to kind of look at those differences to kind of see, here's what they look like before and after. And I've got one more little set of things to show you, and then I'll just throw it wide open for questions, okay? But let's look at this last piece. Let's see. I think I've moved one around. Okay, here we go. So I did a study of 25 ministers in my two states. So my day job is working with Southern Baptists in Minnesota and Wisconsin. So we have 200 churches, and not everybody that took this in this little survey was a CPE student, but I want y'all to know I've got 13 of my pastors in my CPE program. Okay. What did I find when I looked at all of their stuff? When I put 25 of them together, what are the tendencies? Well, they tend to prefer to help other people more than meet their own needs. They tend to have better, warm relationships and hold people accountable. They tend to use logic more than intuition when making decisions, and they tend to achieve more than to manage stress. Now, you might be saying, well, why are you showing me this? Well, there's a good mix of chaplains in this group, and all of the chaplains I've tended to assess have similar patterns, okay? So these are things that can kind of be addressed as you go into that. So let's look at a team paradox. Now, this is the max. This is the most people you can put in one of these. And you can see that my 25 MWBC ministers want to help you, but they don't want to put their own needs forward. And the way I phrase this with them is, what's good for the institution and what's good for the minister? So yeah, pulpit committees want these pastors and ministers. They want helpful, right? But how sustainable is somebody that won't put forth their own needs? So I'm trying to encourage the folks in my tribe to not only be helpful, but also to be assertive and put their own needs forward. These are just circles. So they tend to build positive relationships. They tend to overcommit. They want to help others achieve. And so some of the things I want to help them with is be assertive to your own of your own needs to your mutual benefit. Don't overextend and create stress. Most pastors will say something like, no problem, or can you do me a favor? And they'll say yes. And I always say it depends because I kind of want to hear what I was involved in the favor before I say yes. But this is just a way of asserting yourself. Here's another one. Ministers in our grouping here like to be warm and empathetic, more so than holding people accountable. And this could be why that we're losing some people in our churches because we're not challenging people to grow and holding people accountable. We want to help people reframe enforcing to a caring idea. It's not a punishment. We want to help them clarify expectations and to confront interactions. All right. This last couple of these. Ministers in this group, they tend to be more analytical than intuitive. I don't know. I've just seen this. This is anecdotal. I don't have any data on this, but it seems like to me a lot of mid-career people getting called into ministry are coming out of engineering backgrounds. I'm just seeing a lot of this. Okay. And God bless them. I mean, they are very wise and they can work almost anywhere, but they bring sort of that high analytical gift to the ministry, and it needs it, but it also needs intuitive too. It needs to have both Tyler Riggs and Kate Carter, tornado wrangler and tornado tamer. And then our last one here is ministers surprise. They like to get a lot done, but they don't manage their self-care well. And in my 25, now I don't think we can use this. My understanding of statistics is the smaller the sample set or the smaller the group, the bigger the sample set. So I would need probably 66 out of these 200 to do this to be able to say this was true of my two-state convention. But I can say that these are true of the 25 people that took this, is that they tend to get stuff done, but they don't always tend to take care of themselves. And so these are some recommendations for them of just getting sufficient sleep, of exercising, of identifying and minimizing stressors. And then what do you do to help these people is what you're trying to do in CPE. You know, you just look at these tendencies and you try to talk to them. Hey, be realistic about deadlines. Don't always say it's not a problem. Take care of yourself. If you're highly analytical, invite other people to give you intuition, and then clarify expectations for church leaders. We're not always available. Now, it's funny to me how chaplaincy showed me how unrealistic a lot of pastoral expectations are. Because in chaplaincy, I get to be on call infrequently, but sometimes I'm on call. But in the pastorate, always on call, right? So these are things I think that could be helpful for folks. Now, I know we've had a lot of stuff thrown at you, and that's just, it just oozes out of my pores. And I'm happy to entertain questions. This is my contact information. If you didn't get something that you wanted, like the PowerPoint or the handouts or whatever, I'll be happy to email it to you. And I'll even go one step further. I'm going to say this to anybody on Zoom and anybody in the group. If you will email me at clint@influentialcommunications.org and say you want to take the Harrison assessment, I will give you a complimentary Harrison assessment. Okay. So, and I want it complimentary to you, but not to me. I have to pay for it. But I want you to experience it so you can see what it looks like, what it feels like on the debriefing side, and what you get out of it. And whether you do anything with it or not is up to you. But for me, it really truly has changed my life, because when I make decisions now, I tend to go out and find people who can tell me what could go wrong. And I tend to make me stay at the table till they're convinced that I have really heard them. Okay. And so to me, it's been a life-changing assessment. And I know who I'm talking to. I know all of you have had them all. But it has become for me not just a tool, but it's become something that I've literally woven into everything that I've done with CPE. What questions do you have? And I'm going to change this thing here so I can hear from folks on Zoom as well. Tracy, what question? We'll start with you. All right. I know it's a lot. It's a fire hydrant at 2 o'clock.
So, you go deeper. That was wrong, 12.
Yes. So in the report, there's actually a separate sheet for every single paradox. And it fully explains the whole thing. So it explains every word, because every word matters. What does it mean? And there's a little box down at the bottom I say is the gospel according to Dan Harrison. So when I give a debriefing, I have my corny stuff that I say all the time. But he has highly technical stuff based on his own work that he would say that, for instance, if you're very open, reflective, and you're low certain, that you're probably susceptible to peer pressure. And so it's a very direct communication, right? I might not say it as delicately or as well, okay? But what the paradox report that just has the 12 is 17 pages because it explains everything I said at the beginning, shows you those 12, and then it gives you 1 page for each paradox where it lays everything out, including the recommendations that he has at the bottom. Mhm.
So,
Sure. So Dan Harrison, according to their website, has 3 PhDs. He's got one in math and one in counseling and one in organizational dynamics or whatever. But he studied this for years and developed this. And you can Google us, Google Harrison Assessments. You can read, and my paper actually details all of his credentials and how he came up with the paradox theory. And but no, it's super well respected. It's used everywhere. You have to have a license to debrief, or not a license, but a certification to debrief. Okay. If you want me to run one on somebody, I can do it for you. Happily do that for you, kind of in a retail kind of thing. But honestly, I would rather people be in a wholesale kind of thing where they're able to do it for themselves. Because if it's like me, it's completely permeated everything that I do. And I'll say this, um, you know, the origin of paradox theory, it's in the paper, but it's basically Dan Harrison to Carl Jung to I Ching. Okay. So it's got a very deep philosophical East versus West kind of idea to it. Okay. But when you get involved in the system, there's really 30 different reports you can run because it's got all, it's basically about job satisfaction. It's about retention. It's about, it's amazing what they can do with the questions that you take and do that with. But that's, that for me, became, and you might say, well, what am I going to do if I don't buy any of this stuff or use any of it? Well, you still can ask people. You could even say to somebody on a scale of 1 to 10, how frank would you say you are? On a scale of 1 to 10, how diplomatic would you say you are? Or even just put this question to people. So you prefer being to the point. What would you say to me about people who are diplomatic? And a lot of people are kind of like the fawns in Happy Days. They can't say they're sorry, right, or whatever. But what this means is they can't say good things about the other trait. They'll say something like this: well, I don't beat around the bush, man. I get right to the point. Well, what do you think about people who are diplomatic? I don't like people who beat around the bush. I don't like people who sugarcoat things. Well, what they're telling you is they have a preference for frankness. And it's so much fun for me as a debriefer is just to ask them, what do you think about that other trait? And they'll just go off on it, depending on how much they prefer their own trait. Yes, sir.
Thinking about paradox today, they don't like that other trait. Would they at some point actually someone revert to that other trait?
That's the flip behavior.
The flip behavior.
So let's say
That is possible.
oh, absolutely. So let's say that I have been helpful to you. I've tried to do everything I can for you, Ron, to help you, right? And then you've stressed me out for some reason. Well, thank you. You're very kind. And this never happened. This is totally hypothetical. But let's just say that you just got on my last nerve, right? Then you would see a different version of me than I would prefer. It's the flip behavior. And a lot of times people look at that and they go, well, they don't like that. And a lot of times you'll have people deny their flip behavior. Well, they'll say, well, has anything like that ever happened to you? Oh, no, I don't know where they're getting that from. That's not me. And so then I always say, well, would you ask somebody that you live with what they think about that? And usually you find out that there's more flip there than we recognize. Yes, sir, Greg.
I was thinking last, I'm not used to this. That's what I think that some is. But, what I found, if you want to find out how somebody perceives something else, it's great. It's not yours, but I have
Oh, that's great.
to play. No.
Yeah.
Position, then you get that.
So there's a ton of other applications to consider. So let's say you're a doctor of ministry student somewhere and you want to do a pre-thing on you as you're getting ready to do some learning stuff. This would be an excellent thing to do as a pre-study. And then to come back after you've done your project, written your project, and do a post-study and to show how did your mind change. I've led several doctor of ministry projects at Southeastern Seminary. Some of my students had taken that on. And so we had somebody that did capital stewardship with their church, and they didn't really like to talk about money. And they were kind of low and frank when they started. And over the course of their project, they were able to say, hey, look, I'm more frank now, as a result of my work on this topic. Now, it's a crapshoot because you don't know that they're going to necessarily come out more frank. But it's a good thing to look at to say, okay, here's at least an objective assessment that I can kind of compare apples to apples, and I can kind of see what's out there. So again, it's just a matter of deciding. And for me, I didn't adopt it this hard overnight. My story is literally the story I told you. Somebody gave me this assessment and it explained my bad risk-taking behavior, and I got intrigued. And I kept going back to it and looking at it. And I said, well, I think I want to be trained to do it. I think I want to use it. And so I've been doing it for the past 4 or 5 years. And now, it's not the Holy Spirit and it's not the answer to everything, but I would much rather, I'll just talk to you practically about this. So like you're a supervisor and your students turn in a final evaluation where they did less than they could have. And it's always so frustrating when you see that final evaluation and they kind of phoned it in or they did whatever they did. Well, if you've done a Harrison assessment on them, you've got some data you can put in their final evaluation. You can go back to some of the things that Dr. Harrison said about them, or you can talk about how they did relative to their learning goals. But that has been helpful. It's saved me a lot of time, not to encourage my students to do poorly on their evaluation, but let's say if they don't do their best, then I'm not left completely in a lurch where I've got to reconstruct their story for them. I can go back and I can look at this and I can kind of see, how they're doing. And two, it's not my opinion versus their opinion. It's their assessment data versus what do they want to do about it. So, you can argue with me all day long how I perceive you. But if you're the one in the driver's seat and you're saying, okay, I recognize I need to improve, well, then let's have a conversation about that. And it kind of takes a little bit of that subjectivity out of it, from that regard.
So you need to search for all of them.
I do. Yeah.
Everyone.
Everyone. Yep. So going all the way back to the people that I was supervise. So I've had 42 students in my CPE lifetime. Okay. That includes people that were that I was a supervisory candidate while I was teaching. But every student, and I've had 28 since I started supervising on my own, all of them have had it. In fact, some of them had it twice because we did a pre and a post. And I've spent, it's like Tupperware. I've bought all the Tupperware. So like I've actually spent this money on, like I'm a supervisor trainer of other supervisors. So my candidate was 700. I gave it to his students at no cost, at my cost, but to me, I can train him to use it and see the value of it now. And I do the same thing with the students in Indonesia. So I've given it to all the candidates that I'm training there and their students and taught their supervisors how to use it. The issue is going to be if they want to continue with it. That they'll have to figure that out on their own, right? I mean, not completely alone. They can talk to me about it, but I won't be able to pay for it in perpetuity for everybody that I deal with, right? So, well, yes.
Authorized solution provided. What's involved in the company?
So you agree to be trained and you pay the training fee and you buy into the system where you're able to buy the units for themselves. So for instance, if I were to do a paradox report for you, Ron, right now, the retail price of that would be 2 units, which is $38 times 2. So whatever that is, $74. Plus, if I wanted to charge you for my time, which I think my time's worth stuff. My wife says it's not worth anything. But anyway, there's that. But I don't mind doing that and I enjoy doing that. But what I would much rather do is have people do it for, like learn how to do it themselves and because they can buy it cheaper than they can buy it for like $26 per unit. So the cost moves down to 52 if you're doing it for wholesale. And so I just feel like that's a better, and again, if you just want to try it, put your toe in the water, I can give you a free one just so you can see what it feels like. But I want to draw the line there and just let you decide whether it's something you want to use. But man, there are places where to me, if I were applying for a Lilly grant, like with the Lilly Foundation, I would have something like this to baseline all of my people coming in, and also to do my post test with, so that I could say, because I can write a lot about how have they changed or not changed, or what interventions do we do as a group and that sort of thing.
I'm assuming when you come and provide that they'll do that with really like, for all of it.
Yes, they'll train you. They have a lot of quality assurance on how you debrief. They want you to be very consistent in your language. And I'm okay. I get a little preachery or whatever. I can't help myself. I'm a Texan. You can tell a Texan, but you can't tell them much. So you get a little of that. But they teach you a very uniform way of doing it. But I just can't think of anything else. I'm in now, so I'm going to keep doing this with my students. And just had a batch of 400s finish up this summer, and they all took it. And I've got to do some comparison with them. But I love it from the front end because I was telling Krista, I'm willing. I'm an independent person for like my own affiliate organization. So if I have to spend $52 of my money to acquire a new student, I'm willing to spend that. Okay. Now I'm not going to get everybody that I assess, but I like my chances of talking you into my CPE program a lot better when I can show you your own data and say, here's some ways that we might be able to work together, that I might be able to assist you in CPE.
So you also do this before your acceptance.
Well, let me be very clear. This is not conditional on their acceptance, right? So they can be anything they want to be on this. I'm not going to choose whether or not to accept them on the basis of the assessment. I do it before because I want the interview is going to be so much better. So like any assessment, you all know this. If I were in a relationship with you and I couldn't assess you, it would take me 6 months to learn all these things about you that I could just have assessment. And again, I don't know you perfectly, but if I know your tendencies, then I can relate to you so much better, and it accelerates our relationship by several months because and again, I'm happy to show my students mine. So when we're doing the team paradox, I'm showing how does my behavior affect you guys as a group? Well, if I tend to be, this is happening with the Indonesians in real time. They are super analytical. Their bullet points have bullet points. Okay. I don't have bullet points. I'm very intuitive. I drive those people crazy every single week, right? Because they want to know where the memo is that explain the memo about the memo. And I'm like, hey, there's no memo. Okay. There's just, well, there is one memo, but there's not, and so I will work with them and I try to be a little bit more analytical, but realistically in our relationship, I just say, this is me, right? And this is you. And so we're going to have to work together. So let's work together. All right. Well, I know we had an hour and a half for this, and I would not put anybody through a full hour and a half. But is there one final question or a couple of anybody from Zoom have a question?
I say it. I consider them on the big list.
You do, yeah. Well, that was a different group, and not yeah. That's funny, but that's not going to happen. All right. Anybody in the Zoom planet out there that has a question? All right. Well, thank you all of you for your time. I really appreciate it. I'll be happy to hang back and answer any specific questions you have. But anyway, thank you for putting up with this for the last hour. I really appreciate it. All right. See you guys later.